I watched as a young Marine placed 2 packs of beer on the cash register. "Thank you for your service," the young cashier said with a wide smile. He answered her with a smile. "I'm just doing my duty." My stomach sank. This was the first time I heard this phrase, and it hit me like a stun gun. All the memories that I had pushed into the depths of my soul came flooding back. I, too, once received such smiles, but no, thank you, because I was out of shape and had not worn one for more than 35 years. Limping slightly, I headed back to my truck. I hated the cold. It always made my leg ache more. I threw the grocery bags into the back and climbed into the cab. Despite the cold, sweat streamed down my cheeks, my palms were damp, and my heart was ready to burst out of my chest. I closed my eyes and slowly exhaled, which I had been holding since I stood at the checkout counter. "We must fight this. I won't go through this again." I headed home. I carried 2 bags into the house, put them on the kitchen table, and fell into a chair. Already back, my wife Becky asked as she walked into the kitchen. Talking non-stop, she began to put the food in its place. I was silent. Memories that I had long forgotten began to emerge from somewhere deep inside. "Steve, you bought the wrong yogurt again. I eat Activia, not Dannon Greek yogurt. I already realized that everything went wrong as soon as I saw that you left the shopping list on the table." I heard her speak, but the words did not reach me. Becky put a few things away in the refrigerator and then turned to face me. She stood in silence and looked at me for a couple of moments. "Steve, what happened?" "Nothing." I tried to avoid her gaze. "Don't lie to me, Stephen Moore. After knowing you almost your whole life, divorcing you, and then you talked me into marrying you again, I know you better than you know yourself. Speak." I told her what happened in the store. She sat down on the chair next to me and put her hand on my leg. "Steve, today people have a different attitude towards the army. Now is not the same time as it was then. Now people are proud of those who serve. The Vietnam War was not a popular war. Tell that to John. Oh wait, that's right. He died in that unpopular war. I was no longer the naive boy who went to Vietnam 12 months ago. I have changed. Inside, I was a tired old man, mechanically continuing to live. I didn't tell anyone when I arrived home. I didn't need any celebrations, just peace and quiet. I got off the plane and, as soon as I got to the main terminal, I saw 2 girls with placards. "Murderer," one of them shouted. "Murderer," another shouted, shoving her poster in my face. They shouted some more nasty things, but I only quickened my pace to move away from them. At that moment, 2 long-haired guys stood in my way. "Damn murderer," said one of them. Then he spat in my face. I didn't think so. I acted. In less than a minute, both were on the floor. "Go away, soldier." "I'll sort it out," the policeman said, pushing me towards the baggage claim area. I saw compassion in his eyes. Was he there? Did he know what it was like? His eyes betrayed his secrets. I grabbed my bag and slipped outside. I was back in the real world, and I needed to go home. In October 1969, my best friend John and I enlisted in the Marine Corps through the buddy program. Ever since we were kids, we did everything together. If I wasn't with him, then he was with me. When I ran out of money, I dropped out of college and joined the Marines. John said he didn't have anything better in mind anyway, so he came with me. "Uncle Sam will pay for our last 2 years of school as soon as we return," he said. "It's okay." We trained together, and when I was sent to Vietnam and he wasn't, John didn't think twice. He volunteered to go with me so that we could be together. "If you think I'm going to let you go and have fun on your own, you're even crazier than I thought. Who else will have your back if not me?" Our squad leader was a brutal senior sergeant who was always on our back. To him, our best was never good enough. "Gentlemen, this is my 3rd trip here, and if you don't want to return home in a body bag, you will do as I say." Nobody said a word. Now let's try again, and in order this time. We knew he was wrong. We were Marines. We were invulnerable. It turned out that we are not like that. We survived bad food, monsoons, and locals who tried to kill us. The only bright spot on the base was the Soldiers' Club. Although only the first beer was cold, it was a place to relax and talk. The drunken Marines talked a lot. Some used marijuana instead of beer to cope with difficulties. I, I wanted to keep my head clear as we walked into the jungle. We were lucky. By August, we were short. 28 days and rising, John said, filling in a box on the runt's calendar he hung next to his bunk. The first thing I'll do when I get home is grab Linda and go to Castaways. I'll eat lobster until I throw up. He laughed. Linda was the girl John left at home. She wanted him to commit to her before we left, but John, as always, was not ready for that. We can talk about the wedding after I return from work, he told her. I had Becky at home. She lived 2 houses away from her parents. We went to elementary school together and rode in the car with my dad all through high school. Our first date was 2 months late before I left for training. I've spent these last 8 weeks regretting joining the service. The letters had to suffice until I returned. I spent the last 2 weeks with Becky before leaving for Vietnam. I was leaving for a year and told her she could date other guys if she wanted. Okay, that was stupid because I had to listen to an angry girl explain to me what it means to be exclusive. If you want to break up, say so, but it will be your decision, not mine. I didn't say. We swore our love to each other. It will be a long year. With my right hand, I threw my bag into the trunk of the first taxi I came across and carefully sat in the back seat. The aching pain in my leg made itself felt. I thought about the pills in my jacket pocket. I'll wait until I get home. These pills put me in a fog, so I only took them before bed. Where are we going? Asked the taxi driver, turning to me. 2742 Northeast Cleveland Street. It is located 2 miles northwest of downtown Minneapolis. I know where it is. Half an hour's drive, about $45. Is that okay with you? Yes, no problem. Just get me out of here. I looked in the direction of the terminal. I almost expected these 2 crazy girls with signs to burst through the terminal doors looking for me. I leaned back in my chair with relief. It's over. I'm home. But then I thought of John's mother. What will I tell her? I closed my eyes. Memories flooded back to me. Calm down, guys, our squad leader shouted, trying to shut down 2 guys who were fighting each other in the barracks. I said, stop it. He shouted again, this time with more severity. Listen carefully. On today's patrol, we will make a detour around this village. He pointed to a red cross on a large map on the wall. And then we'll move 3 kilometers to the northwest, bypassing this village, he continued, tracing his finger along the route that we plan to take to the next red cross. Headquarters has received information about recent Viet Cong activity in the area, and we need to check. It will be a long night, so bring more water and rations if you don't want to go hungry. The captain has given permission for additional weapons, so Doug and Turk will carry light anti-tank missiles. Everyone will be there at 16 o'clock. Any questions? Nobody said a word. Free. When we arrived at the first village, dusk fell. I smelled the smoke from the fires long before I saw half a dozen huts. The only people we noticed were 2 women sitting near a large pot of rice. We did not approach them and continued to move. A few stars were barely visible in the sky through the thick clouds. I would give a lot for a full moon. About 40 minutes later, we saw the dark huts of the second village. We split up. 4 went to the left, 4 to the right. The rest entered the village from the south. The plan was good. The Viet Cong had their own plan. Ray, Kevin, John, and I moved along the left side of the perimeter, staying about 8 feet apart along a narrow path between 2 rice fields. We didn't even have time to notice anything. Their bullets went through us like butter. Ray and Kevin, who were walking ahead of me, feel like balloons punctured by a needle. I rushed into the rice field to the right of the trail and fired the entire first magazine in the direction of the flashes of gunfire. The sounds of gunfire around me echoed in my head. I pushed them into the background. I had more important things to do. I reloaded my weapon and again opened fire at the places where the shots were coming from. In the darkness, it seemed as if fire was coming from all sides. A sharp pain pierced my right thigh. Crap! I shot non-stop until I ran out of bullets. Damn it. So what now? I knew I was trapped. I prayed that there would be another magazine in my backpack, but there was none. I hid in the water and mud, trying to breathe slowly so that my body did not rise to the surface. My heart was beating so hard that I couldn't calm it down. I knew only one thing. If I didn't get out of here, I would die. I crawled through 1.5 feet of mud along the path we had come by. When I reached John, I saw him lying face down on the path. As quietly as I could, I pulled myself out of the water and found myself next to him. He didn't move. I turned it over. His eyes were open and met my gaze. "I need help," I shouted, instantly drawing fire from the left flank. Bullets exploded on the ground around us. I covered John with my body and immediately felt another sharp pain. Crap, nobody answered. We couldn't stay still. I had to move. I left the rifle and, on pure adrenaline, dragged John's lifeless body along the trail, hiding us behind 2 fallen trees. "Don't you dare die. Can you hear me?" I shouted, trying to figure out where his wound was. Pressing the wound with one hand, I tore my bandage with my teeth and applied it to the wound, maintaining pressure to stop the bleeding. "Don't worry, buddy. You'll get through it. You'll be home with Linda soon." He should have survived. He was my best friend. John's eyes were fixed on me. He opened his mouth, but all I heard was a gurgling sound. He didn't say a word. The next time I screamed, our squad leader appeared. "They're sending a helicopter to evacuate." How badly was he injured? "Bullet in the neck. I think I've stopped the bleeding." "Wait, we'll be leaving here soon." John didn't survive. He was dead when we returned to base. The bullet severed an artery in his neck. I was shot in the right thigh, and another bullet went through my left shoulder. Unlike John, I survived. At least that's what I told myself. "Boy, that's $40, the taxi driver said, bringing me back to reality. I looked at my watch, 7 a.m. Everyone is already up and getting ready for work and school. I tipped the taxi driver a tenner, grabbed my bag, and headed for the front door. To say that they were surprised is to say nothing. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming back?" "I would have met you at the airport," my father said, hugging me while my siblings looked on. I winced in pain. My left hand had not yet fully healed. "I'll let everyone know that you're back." "Everyone will want to see you," my mother said, trying to get closer to me for a hug. "Maybe later. I am very tired and want to rest and get some sleep. Maybe later in the week." It disappointed them, especially my father. He was proud of me and wanted to show me off to his friends, but he respected my wishes. I spent most of the morning and afternoon talking with my parents. They didn't ask the questions that I knew worried them, and I myself didn't say anything, except that I was still recovering, and perhaps it would be like that for a long time. "Well, you look good." "I've lost a little weight, but that's okay," my mother said. "How long have you been back?" asked the father. "I have 30 days of vacation, and then I will be demobilized. Doctors hope the limp will go away over time, but they aren't sure. They mentioned something about a possible disability, but I need to wait until my leg is completely healed to understand how serious the damage is." "Does Becky already know you're back?" her mother asked. "Not yet. I plan to surprise her when she gets home from work tonight." I smiled at this thought. I took a pill for pain. She knocked me out for a couple of hours. Around 4:30, I got out of bed, took a shower, and put on some clothes that had been hanging in the closet unused for the past 2 years. I looked at myself in the mirror. It was a little big, but I didn't care. I felt almost normal. When Becky saw me, she almost kicked down the door to get to me. She hugged me so tightly that I thought she broke a couple of ribs. At 5'8", she was only 3 inches shorter than me, but I didn't think she was that strong. "God, I missed you so much," she said, kissing me over and over while her parents stood behind and watched. Then her mood became more serious. "I'm sorry about John." "Yes, me too." We spent almost the entire night kissing and talking. Or rather, she spoke, and I listened and tried to steer the conversation away from everything I didn't want to talk about, including John. What I definitely noticed was that Becky looked exactly the same. She still wore her dark brown hair down to her shoulders, her bright blue eyes still sparkled when she looked at me, and she still didn't let me get a word in edgewise when she started talking. Nothing about me was the same anymore. It was hard, but I tried to focus on her, and not on a place somewhere on the other side of the world. Your mother said that you received some kind of award for bravery. Will you get a medal or something? No medal, just a piece of paper that says I'm a hero for letting John die. It sounded sarcastic, but Becky didn't seem to notice. Or if she noticed, she decided not to raise the topic. I kissed her goodbye, or rather good night, and went home. I wasn't looking forward to what I had to do the next day, but I couldn't put it off any longer. I had no idea where I would start, but I owed John. I'll manage somehow. This morning I stood at a door that I had entered many times without knocking. But not this time. My eyes moistened even before I rang the bell. John's mother looked at me and began to cry. I closed the distance between us and hugged the woman who had been my second mother throughout my childhood. I couldn't help myself and tried to say how sorry I was. She reassured me, repeating over and over again that everything was fine. We both knew it wasn't true. We sat next to each other on the sofa in the living room. I saw an American flag with a purple heart medal pinned to it sitting on the mantelpiece. She caught my eye. It's a pity that you weren't at John's wake. It was a beautiful ceremony, everyone was there. The local chapter of the Veterans Organization sent an honor guard and fired a volley of 21 guns at John. You could see in her eyes that she was proud of her fallen son. We buried him in Sunset Gardens Cemetery next to my parents. I didn't want him to be alone. She didn't want to know how he died. All that was important to her was that he didn't suffer. These were the hardest 2 hours of my life. We didn't heal each other from our wounds that morning, but we grieved for someone who was special to us. I got off the plane alive. John came down in a coffin covered with a flag. It wasn't fair. When I left, she told me not to disappear from their lives, but I was already a stranger, even for yourself. 3 weeks after my discharge, I proposed to Becky. She said yes. I wanted my old life back. I wanted normality. We were signed by a notary on July 1st, 1972. We had a small celebration at her parents' house, just for family and a few friends. We went to the North Shore of Lake Superior for our honeymoon. We rented a house and got to know each other again after a year of separation. This week has been a real paradise. I can handle it, I thought. I returned to college in September. I watched from afar as other students protested against the war. This was their war, not mine. Good news awaited us at Christmas. I returned home from class and saw my incredibly happy wife. We're pregnant, she screamed. We missed dinner. We made love, planned our future, and fell asleep in each other's arms. Our new life was changing rapidly, and we couldn't be happier. 12 days after our anniversary, we welcomed Abby into our lives. We became a family. This was the last good memory of that year. I tried, but I couldn't keep everything under control. At first, I began to suffer from recurring nightmares that plagued my nights. Most nights I woke up screaming, covered in sweat, and those were good nights. Other nights I would push Becky out of bed. Honey, if I start tossing around in my sleep, just wake me up. Sometimes it worked. Other times she poured a glass of cold water on me. We ended up replacing our huge water mattress with 2 single beds. The first piece of our marriage broke off. After just 1 semester, I dropped out of college. Even with Becky's help, I could no longer concentrate or remember what I read. Frankly, I was tired of looking at the faces of students who were protesting against a war they knew nothing about. I wanted to tell them, it's easy to talk when you sleep in your own bed. I jumped from job to job until they were all gone. I had a million excuses, but that's all they were excuses. If I wasn't fired for being late, then I got into trouble because of my attitude. One day Becky came home and said McDonald's was hiring, and we had a huge fight. You think I'm only good for frying burgers at McDonald's? I muttered, because like most days, I was either drunk or high. If that's what it takes for you to start contributing to our marriage, then so be it. I can't support 3 people and provide you with alcohol at the same time. I don't have that much money. Why don't you become a man? Well, I made you a baby, didn't I? So this is definitely okay. I giggled like an idiot. Becky clearly didn't like this. I thought I married an adult. Looks like I was wrong. The look she gave me was far from the loving look I remembered when we first got married. She grabbed Abby and left me alone with my vodka and pills that I bought on the street that morning. I heard the bedroom door slam shut. From that night on, I was sent to sleep on the sofa. I had to do something, anything, but I didn't. Her once bright blue eyes were now cold, narrow slits. The smile I fell in love with disappeared, and the soft, warm words that we whispered to each other in bed became a distant memory. They were replaced by sharp barbs, ugly quarrels, and, finally, complete silence. I watched the life drain from our marriage, and just like with John, I was powerless to stop it. Stop! You can't do this! I screamed through the closed window as 2 men in a tow truck took my car. The next day, when I returned from the store with booze, I found my things in boxes in the hallway in front of our apartment door. If I hadn't been so drunk, I probably would have cried. This was only a temporary obstacle. I thought I could handle it. Only I believed it myself. My father helped me move the boxes to their house. I lived with my parents again in the room in which I spent my childhood. Our marriage lasted 2 years, 10 months, and 18 days. Honestly, I'm surprised Becky lasted this long. If I were her, I would have kicked myself out a long time ago. I loved Becky and Abby, but I let the demons in my head ruin our lives. 2 weeks after Becky kicked me out, I received divorce papers. I must have signed them, although I don't remember it. Most of the time, I was not myself from morning to evening. My parents tried to help. They took me to the Veterans Hospital, hoping that they would help me there. The doctors were useless. I was one of thousands who could not cope with the hell I experienced there. They showed interest, nodding as I told them my deepest thoughts. Then they gave me pills, as many tablets as you like. The pills helped, but not in the way the doctors intended. I realized that if I took the pills and washed them down with enough alcohol, I could sleep without nightmares, but they were waiting for me when I woke up. I took whatever I could get my hands on to numb the pain and memories. Nothing helped. Like most guys who were in Vietnam, I saw death. When I pulled the trigger and the body fell, I felt sorry, but over time I stopped feeling it. It was my job. That's why I was there. These deaths were justified. But death only truly touched me that night when John died in my arms. Now I was thinking only about this. I screamed at God. Why did he take my best friend and not me? He never answered. So I just gave up and died in my own way. Alcohol and medications prescribed by doctors were not enough to eliminate the pain. I needed something stronger. Street drugs became my lifesaver. My parents kicked me out when they caught me stealing. First I stole money, then everything I could sell in a pawn shop or on the street. I took advantage of my friends until they got tired of me. For the next 20 months I begged and stole things from cars. I slept wherever I found myself at night. Twice I was taken to the ambulance with frostbite. It almost finished me off. I was a disgusting homeless person. If it weren't for my grandmother, I probably would have died on the street. I found myself on her doorstep one cold night when there was nowhere else to go. I couldn't remember the last time I ate normal food. I knocked on her door a little before 7. Please, 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 I prayed to no one. She opened the door and looked at me for a long time. It seemed to me like an eternity. Steve, you look terrible and you stink. Go take a shower and I'll make you something to eat. When I came out, there were clean clothes on the bed. It belonged to my grandfather, and I was surprised that she still had it. He died many years ago in a car accident. I had lost a lot of weight and my clothes were hanging loose, but I didn't care. They were clean. Grandma watched as I ate 2 bowls of soup and a tuna sandwich. I had nothing in my stomach except a half pint of Mad Dog 2020 wine. Grandmother. Steve, I'm tired of your lies and promises. Be a man this time. If not for myself, then for Abby. She needs a father, not a useless drunk. The sofa folds out if you want to stay. And if you're wondering, I don't have any alcohol or money in my house. Her thin, bony hands held my face. She kissed my forehead. You are stronger than you think. You need to take the first step, and then everything will go from there. Honey, John is dead. You didn't kill him, but if you don't do something soon, you'll join him. And that would be a real shame. I don't want to see my grandson buried before me. She went to bed. I woke up. During the Civil War, it was called the soldier's heart. Since then, the condition has been called various names: shell shock, battle fatigue, and more recently, post-traumatic stress disorder. Whatever you call it, I had it. My grandmother helped me get the help I needed, but only after I told her I was willing to do whatever it took. She was no longer the kind old lady I remembered from childhood. She hardened greatly after the death of her grandfather, and sometimes her words shocked me. Staying on the right path was not easy. I stumbled, but now I got to my feet. I don't know if I hit rock bottom, as they say, but at night I thought about what I had lost and berated myself for my weakness. I'm tired of being tired. Part of my therapy was that Greg, my therapist, had me keep a journal and write down my thoughts at least once a day. Write everything down. Anger, fears, whatever you feel at the moment. Everything you tried to forget. Trust me, it will help. It was difficult, and I shed a lot of tears, but I followed his advice. I realized that I would have to do hard work to improve. No one could save me except myself. My parents kicked me out when I stole my mom's jewelry and pawned it for drugs. Now they were taking the let's see what happens approach. I didn't blame them. After 3 painful months, Greg and I touched on what caused my downfall. Steve, you need to come to terms with what happened to John and move on. If you don't do this, you will never fully recover. I'm not saying that you need to forget about what happened. What I'm saying is that you need to forgive yourself for this. You already told me you couldn't save him. So what's holding you back? I've thought about this a lot. Guilt. When I received orders to go to Vietnam, John couldn't handle it. He volunteered to go with me. I should have refused him, but I didn't. If he had refused, he would still be alive. I will never forgive myself for this. Did you force him to go? Did you tell him you wouldn't be his friend if he didn't go? If I understand correctly, he volunteered himself. He wanted to be close to you. You should be proud that you had a friend who was willing to put himself in danger just to be by your side. This week, I want you to write the story, My Best Friend John. Don't hold back, write down everything you have, and if you need more time, don't worry. Just do it. It took less than a week. Damn, as soon as I started, it all came out. My notes had no structure, no paragraphs. There were probably a million mistakes, but everything was on paper. Finally, all this was not inside me. I gave the notes to Greg at the next meeting. Steve, I don't want to read this, Greg said, returning the notes to me, which surprised me. I asked you to do this for you. If you finished, you might know someone who would be interested in reading this. I didn't have the courage to convey it personally. She lost more than me. I mailed the notes to John's mother with a short letter. That's what your son meant to me. What do you have to lose? She won't shoot at you. At least I hope so. I wasn't as confident as my grandmother. I drove to Becky's apartment complex. I put it off for weeks. My armpits were wet, and so were my palms. The building, like me, has aged. I went up to the 3rd floor and found apartment No. 312. I was still 12 pounds lighter than the last time she saw me. I pulled my hair into a ponytail, and the dark circles under my eyes almost disappeared. Abstaining from illegal drugs and getting adequate sleep will do wonders for your body. I hesitated for a moment. I thought for a moment, will she recognize me? Oh yes, he will. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, and it was as if a Viet Cong bullet was burning in my stomach. I knocked on the door and waited. Becky opened the door, saw me, and immediately slammed the door in my face. I didn't even have time to open my mouth. I hoped she would at least talk to me. What I noticed in the short moment I saw her was that her beautiful long hair had disappeared and her face looked thinner, although she had never been plump. Grandma didn't feel sorry for me at all when I returned just 35 minutes later. Steve, what did you expect? That she will welcome you with open arms? You were worthless, and she divorced you because of it. As my grandmother put it, at my age, I don't have the time or patience to deal with other people's problems. I've seen everything, and nothing you or anyone else does will surprise me. Unlike when I returned from Vietnam, now my grandmother no longer gave me any concessions. Irritated, I paced back and forth in the kitchen. I just wanted to see my girl. She has no right. Grandma stopped me before I could finish speaking. You've burned too many bridges over the last couple of years. Some of them you will have to restore one board at a time. But I have changed. I work, go to evening courses. I've been sober for 5.5 months now and will never get involved with illegal drugs again. How can I show her this? Grandma touched my cheek. Darling, life is unfair. You know this better than anyone. Don't show Becky that you've changed, but don't push or get angry. Just give her a chance and see what happens. I heeded her advice. Every night after dinner, I knocked on Becky's door. On the third evening, she opened the door and told me to leave. Then she slammed the door in my face again. At least she spoke to me. On the sixth evening, she opened the door again. Why are you following me? What do you need from me? I'm sorry. That's all I managed to say before the door slammed shut again. On the 10th day, I made little progress. I knocked, and she opened the door abruptly. We are all sorry, but there are things that cannot be forgiven. There was coldness in her voice, and I saw the door again. On the 12th day, I got lucky. Becky opened the door on the first knock. She was silent. She just looked at me with hatred. I cleared my throat and spoke. Can I see Abby? Come in, but don't stay long. I saw two small arms wrapped around Becky's legs. I got down on one knee and waited. A small head peeked out from behind Becky's left leg, looked at me for just a split second, and then hid behind it again. Baby, this man is your dad. She didn't move. See what you've done? Your own daughter doesn't even want to see you. There was venom in her voice. Abby, I brought you something. I pulled out a folded gift from behind my back. Abby slowly walked out from behind her mom, one hand still clinging to her mom's leg. Abby had the same long brown hair that Becky once had. She looked at the brightly decorated package with her huge blue eyes. I handed it to her. This is for you. Abby looked at her mother. Becky nodded. Abby took 2 steps forward and grabbed the gift. Taking it in her hands, she immediately forgot about me. She started tearing the packaging. Her smile was worth 100 times what I paid for the doll. What should I say? Thank you for the doll, she said in a quiet voice. Okay, you gave her a doll, now go away. I didn't argue. I'm very sorry, I said on the way out. There was no answer. The next 2 nights no one opened, but I kept coming. I was rebuilding the bridge one plank at a time, as my grandmother said. The next evening, Becky answered the door before I could even knock. How did she even know I was there in the hallway? Steve, do you think one stupid doll is enough to make up for all the harm and pain you've caused? No, but I had to start somewhere. Look, I can't bring back the past. I can't undo the hell you both went through. But I can do everything I can to make sure this never happens again. Well, your daughter wants to see you. Why, I'm not sure. 5-year-olds forget quickly, unlike the rest of us. She's in the living room, watching TV. You have half an hour, then I put her to bed. I looked at Becky as she left the room. I was right, she lost weight. Hi, baby, I said, sitting down on the carpet next to my daughter and her new doll. I pulled Abby onto my lap. We hugged her and watched cartoons together for the next 30 minutes. I felt like the father I should have become many years ago. Abby, honey, it's time to go to bed. Abby jumped up and ran to her mother. I kissed the top of Abby's head. See you tomorrow, dear. I headed towards the exit. But Becky wasn't going to let me go that easily. I don't want my daughter to suffer. Can you hear me? I don't want you to come here, give her gifts, play the good guy, and then disappear when things get complicated like last time. This is our life now, not yours. She's still my daughter, whether you like it or not. I want to see her. I want to be a part of her life. When you lose your temper, you give up this right. Or have you forgotten that part of our divorce agreement? I loved you, but it wasn't enough. Alcohol, substances. I can't take the risk of you breaking down again when things get hard. Back then I had problems that I didn't have the courage to deal with. I'm better now. I got help. I tried my best to prove that I was right. I'm happy for you, but I was the one who picked up the pieces last time and dealt with the crap you left behind. Do you even know how a woman feels when a dealer knocks on your door and demands money for the substances your husband bought? When he threatens my daughter? You have no idea what we've been through. Although I don't think you deserve it, I will let you see Abby on Monday and Wednesday evenings and every other Sunday. If this is not enough, it is better to contact a lawyer. Legally, you have no right to meet. But I'm not insensitive, and Abby needs a father, even one like you. She closed the door. Rebuilding this bridge will probably take longer than even Grandma thought. The only thing I couldn't say about my life now was that it was boring. I worked, went to school twice a week, saw my therapist, and spent the rest of my time with Abby. Between this, I managed to sleep for several hours. I thought I had finally pulled myself together and turned the corner. But I was wrong. One evening after class, I went to a bar with several classmates. One glass of beer won't hurt, right? One glass turned into two, and then I didn't remember how much more I drank. How I got home in one piece is a real miracle. The only thing I remember for sure was my grandmother's reaction when I stumbled into the house drunk. "Hi, Grandma," I muttered, closing the door behind me. And suddenly, he received a slap in the face. "If you come into my house drunk again, you'll find all your things on the lawn. Do you understand me?" I felt like a first grader. I nodded. "I'm going to bed, and if I feel sick, it would be better if you cleaned everything up." She shook her head in disappointment, going upstairs. That night, as in Vietnam, I realized that I was not invulnerable. The next morning, I cooked her breakfast and made coffee. "Sorry, Grandma, it won't happen again." "Damn it, it won't happen again. Not if you want to stay here. I won't put up with your crap. I don't have the strength for this. You failed once. Learn from this. Even at 5 feet tall, she was a real force." 2 weeks later, I had an unexpected surprise when I went to visit Abby. Becky invited me to stay for dinner. I'm late at work, and we're just sitting down to dinner. Enough for 3 if you want to stay. It was like a dream come true. I had my girls again, at least for a little while. Then for a while, she waited for dinner every 2 weeks. I gathered all my courage and finally asked if I could take them both to a restaurant. To my surprise, she agreed. "Steve, so there is no misunderstanding. This is not a date. We're just going out to dinner." "No problem. Abby has a favorite restaurant. Chuck E. Cheese. The pizza is trash, but there are games and shows. Not cheap, but she loves it. And remember, this is not a date." For the first time in months, I felt optimistic. I had a chance to correct at least part of what I had done. My mood was great until I took my grandmother to a restaurant on Saturday. We had just received our order when out of the corner of my eye, I saw Becky walk in, and she wasn't alone. "Steve, shut your mouth and eat dinner," Grandma said, cutting her steak. I saw them come in, and in case you were wondering, Becky knows you're here too. You are no longer married, and she has every right to date whoever she wants. If you want her back, you'll have to apologize profusely and prove that you deserve a second chance. Until then, it looks like you have some serious competition. Dinner was ruined. At least now I knew where I stood. But this did not make me happy. The walk home from the restaurant was quiet. I had a lot of thoughts. "Thank you for dinner." "Please, Grandma. I owe you a lot, and not just dinner." "Steve, you don't owe me anything." "For other people, perhaps yes, but that's a completely different story." I said nothing. I knew what she meant. "Would you like some coffee? Or maybe some tea?" "No, thank you. I think I'll read a little before bed." Good night, Grandma. I wrote in my journal for almost an hour. Today, words flowed from my fingers onto the pages. By midnight, I was completely emotionally drained. I had to get up for work by 7 in the morning, so I decided to go to bed. Lying in the dark, I stared at the ceiling. Memories and regrets bounced around in my head like a ping-pong ball until sleep finally came. I worked weekends at Dunkin' Donuts. On weekdays, I worked full-time as a forklift operator. I needed to occupy all my free time so as not to do another stupid thing. The extra money was nice, and I enjoyed serving the clients, many of whom I knew. I was up to my ears in the Sunday after church rush when my parents walked into the cafe, followed by Becky and Abby. Crap, welcome to Dunkin' Donuts. What will you order? I spoke to my parents on the phone occasionally, but this was the first time I had met them face to face since moving in with my grandmother. Steve, how long have you been working here? Mom asked. A couple of weeks. They accommodate my schedule, and it's not rocket science. The line behind them was getting longer. What can I give you? They placed an order. I prayed that they wouldn't stay in the cafe to eat. I didn't need any more emotional turmoil this morning. Abby looked at me. Hi, Daddy. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a dollar bill, and bought my daughter a heart-shaped donut with pink icing. From my heart to yours. Becky gave me an irritated look and pushed Abby towards the order pickup window. Thank God they left. Your mother called an hour ago and tried to get information about you from me, my grandmother said as soon as I entered the house. I told her that if she wants to know something about you, she should talk to you directly. I'm not your secretary. Grandma gave me a sly smile. That made her a little angry, but I won't allow myself to be dragged into your affairs, not by you or my daughter. The TV was on. I looked in his direction, but was thinking about something completely different. Shouldn't you be getting ready for dinner now? I'm not sure I'll go. Why not? My stomach hurts a little. I think I'm getting sick. I didn't look her in the eye. Stephen Moore, shower immediately and get ready. You take your daughter to dinner, and whether Becky wants to go with you is up to her. You won't disappoint this girl, do you hear me? You just made a connection with her, and if you mess it up this time, there may not be a second chance. As always, Grandma was right. Neither Becky nor I mentioned Saturday night. This evening was dedicated only to Abby. We ate pizza, played a dozen games, and I even won a stuffed giraffe. Everything went well until I took them home. Honey, go wash up. I need to talk to your dad. I received a kiss, a hug with both arms, and a love you before she walked into the apartment. Becky waited for Abby to leave. I want to explain about last night. No need. We are not married, and you can date anyone you want. If you want, I can take Abby on the weekends so you don't have to adjust to her. A shadow of anger crossed Becky's face. My personal life suits me quite well, and I don't need your help, especially from someone like you. Abby will not stay with you for the weekend, not now, not in the near future. Steve, you still remain unknown to me, and until you prove that this is not just a temporary phenomenon, the visitation schedule will remain the same. I guess we both know where we stand now. Thank you for a pleasant evening. Bitch, I shouted, not addressing anyone in particular, and hit the steering wheel. I was angry about being rejected and being dictated to. I tried to stay on the right track, and Becky treated me like a 10-year-old child. I didn't need that kind of attitude. Grandma immediately realized that something was wrong as soon as I entered the house. How was your night? Okay, before I take them home, I even suggested to Becky that I could babysit Abby if she wanted to spend time with her boyfriend. Let me guess, I didn't like that. You were not mistaken. She told me to stay out of her personal life, and until I proved that I had truly changed, there would be no overnight visits. What a bitch. Steve, if I were her, I would tell you the same thing. Since you left, Abby has been her only responsibility, and honestly, she's done a great job. Listen to me and clear your ears this time. It will take time to earn her trust. If you can't stand it, you better stop now. Abby will get through this. She's strong. And Becky, she doesn't trust you anyway, and this will only prove to her that she was right about you all along. This will take much longer than I had hoped. On Wednesday, I had to work overtime and arrived at Becky's apartment late. I thought you wouldn't come. Abby is ready for bed. Someone on the second shift got sick, and I had to stay at work until they found a replacement. You could have called. I would call if I had your number. She was embarrassed and wrote her number on a piece of paper. Here, and I guess I need yours too. I didn't like her sarcastic tone. I gave her my grandmother's number. How about I read Abby a bedtime story? Becky nodded and led me to Abby's room. Dad, hey baby, I came to read you a bedtime story. She jumped out of bed, ran to the shelf, and grabbed the book. Read this one. She handed me a Dr. Seuss book. I read the story of the Lorax and the trees. When I finished, she hugged and kissed me. I quickly said goodbye to Becky and left the apartment. I wasn't going to confront her again today. The next 2 months were very busy. Greg talked me into joining a support group that met every Wednesday night at 5 o'clock. This meant that I could only see Abby for a few minutes before she went to bed that day. Becky and I got along better. I would have dinner at her apartment every Friday night or take them out. Things were looking up until I met Carol, the weekend manager at Dunkin' Donuts. We ran into each other at the grocery store and started chatting. One thing led to another, and I asked her out. We went to a local steakhouse and had a great time together. After that, we met every weekend, mostly on Saturdays. One evening, I met Becky with her friends. There was nothing special in her gaze. When I went to see Abby on Monday, there was a chill in the air. She didn't say anything that night or Wednesday, but she called on Thursday to cancel Friday's dinner. That way you'll have one more evening to take your girlfriend out on. She said the word girlfriend as if it were a whole phrase. Or maybe it'll give you a free evening to spend with your friend. I didn't soften the blow. I don't need to justify myself to you or anyone else. And I don't need it. Then I remembered what my grandmother always told me, listen, don't talk. Listen, we could talk back and forth like this all night, and it would only drive us further apart. How about a truce? I don't want to fight, and for Abby's sake, we need to try to make things work. Steve, I'm still dealing with what you did in the past. Becky, don't think you're the only one. I too still struggle with what I did then. It took me months of therapy to even begin to improve. I've barely begun to deal with it. We need to sit down and talk, not yell, not argue, but actually talk to each other one day. I wanted to talk for a long time, but all you needed was to get drunk or drugged every night. I wasn't ready then. I felt guilty for John's death and couldn't cope with the pain. When alcohol didn't help, I tried illicit substances. You and Abby ended up becoming what the military calls collateral damage. I'm better now, and although it will take a long time, I'm determined to get my old life back. I would like you and Abby to be a part of this life. Becky didn't say anything. Steve felt his stomach drop. I understand if you don't want it. Steve, you're putting too much on me today. I understand that you are working on yourself, but you have a lot further to go before I can accept this. Maybe in a couple of months, if everything goes well, we can return to this conversation again. I would like that. How about I take you and Abby to dinner tomorrow, at my expense? I always paid. Friday evening went well. Abby was happy to see me, but Becky seemed more relaxed. I wanted to be normal again, but I knew it would take time and require a lot of effort. For the first time since I got off the drugs, I knew I could cope. I joined Greg's Wednesday support group for one reason. He assured me that it would help me get back on track by connecting with other veterans who were facing the same problems as me. It really helped, but it also opened my eyes to other unresolved issues in my life. Hi, my name is Steve Moore, I said the first night. Welcome, Steve, they answered in unison. I am a former alcoholic and a thief. I managed to alienate my entire family and lost my wife and little daughter. If it weren't for my grandmother, I would be dead now. In other words, you're a loser just like us, someone shouted from the back row. All I want is my old life back. Hearing giggles, I added, okay, I'll rephrase that. I want back what I had before, damn Vietnam. It won't work, said a man in the front row. The best you can hope for is a fresh start. I know because I had several such beginnings, and I failed each one. I'm not going to fail anymore, I said with a hint of anger in my voice. Well, good luck to you. But like all of us, you have to go through it, fighting every day. I will do everything possible to straighten out my life, but now I understand that I can't do it alone. I ask for your help. Everyone looked at each other. I lost my best friend there. He died in my arms. He had a high draft number, but he went to serve because of me. I couldn't forgive myself, and when the pain became unbearable, I started taking everything I could get my hands on to numb it. Didn't help, a voice rang out. I shook my head. With tears in my eyes, I continued, I've been sober for almost 9 months now, and I've only had one alcohol relapse. I need to persevere. I have a little daughter who is counting on me. I want her to get to know the real me, not some stoned loser. I stopped. Everything that needed to be said was said. This is how my first night went. It was a kind of baptism by fire, and soon I was no longer a beginner. Greg was right, talking helped. Here I could say whatever I wanted, and no one would judge me. Don't get me wrong, these guys were tough sometimes because they had been through it all themselves. But for the first time, I knew I could survive. There were 2 people in the group that I didn't like. I thought they complained more than worked on their problems. Their constant whining lowered the overall mood of the group. One night, I couldn't stand it anymore. Keith, all you do is complain about how hard it was for you when you came back. We all have problems, some more, some less, but you don't hear us complaining about them every week, do you? Keith clenched his fists. You have no idea what I went through there, and then I returned to a world that didn't care about me. I've lost everything. I still have nothing. Okay, you've had a hard time, but no one is going to give you anything on a silver platter. Doug has given up his addictions, Ron has returned to school, and David has been working for 3 months, which is a new record for him. If you want something, you have to earn it. Hey man, you're starting to sound like my therapist. Why do you think this is so? Maybe it's time to start listening to him. A week after the meeting, I sat down to talk with Greg. There are a lot of guys who need help but aren't getting anything from the VA. What qualifications do you need to become a therapist like you? Greg looked at me suspiciously. Well, I studied psychology and sociology at university. I am currently in a master's program in mental health counseling. It's a 2-year program, and I'll graduate in 3 months. Are you thinking about changing your profession? What kind of profession is there? I work as a forklift operator in a warehouse. I definitely don't want to carry boxes for the rest of my life. I'd like to do something that makes a difference. You can do something meaningful, but you won't become rich. If it weren't for my wife, who works, we would have a hard time paying the mortgage and supporting 3 children on my salary. If you want, I will explain what is needed for this, and you can decide for yourself. The next semester, I changed my major. I had nothing to lose, and I liked the new direction. I no longer relapsed, and taking harmful substances was for losers, and I was no longer one of them. Becky and I called a truce and went back to having family dinners on Fridays. Carol and I never saw each other again. She was fun, but not someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Honestly, I still had this fantasy of me, Becky, and Abby being a family again. Although Becky never let me know she was softening up. But I could dream, and I did it almost every night. 2 weeks later, Becky approached me on Monday evening. Steve, are you working or doing something this Saturday? No. Why are you asking? Abby is spending the weekend with my mom, and I thought maybe we could finally talk about something we've been putting off talking about for a long time. My stomach clenched and my heart began to beat faster. I would like that. What time on Saturday? Why don't you pick me up at 9 and we'll go have breakfast? I have a feeling we'll need all day. She gave me a cautious smile. I prayed that I could keep my emotions under control. Before I left on Saturday morning, my grandmother put her hand on my shoulder. Don't ruin everything today. Listen to her and let her do the talking, at least in the beginning. Remember that she will tell you how she sees it from her side. You may not agree with everything she says, but this is not the time to argue. Shut up and listen not only to what she says, but how she says it. And yet, I'm sorry won't work anymore. Things have gone too far. Try to explain your actions and move on. Understood? Yes, and this time I won't ruin anything. I promise. This was a promise I was going to keep. With a kiss on the cheek from Grandma and a nervous stomach, I drove to Becky's apartment. I had to wait 10 minutes while she finished getting ready. I wasn't sure, but I thought it was her way of showing that she was in charge today. At breakfast, we mostly discussed work. She talked about 2 seminars her boss wanted her to attend, and I mentioned that I had changed my major in college without going into detail. The topic we needed to discuss didn't come up until after we had eaten and returned to her house. Becky leaned back on the couch in her living room. Who will start first? I sat down on the chair opposite her. Since I was the one who caused this crisis, why don't you start first? And she began. I admit, for the first half hour, everything went much better than I expected. Becky told me how much she loved me and how Abby's birth was the happiest moment of her life. But then everything went downhill. For a man who swore he loved his wife and daughter, you clearly didn't show it. How could you do such terrible things to us? Drinking was bad, but it was nothing compared to lying, stealing, and illegal substances. It got to the point where I was afraid to leave baby alone with you. Tears flowed down her cheeks, and I felt them on mine. My mom said you would come to your senses one day, but my dad thought you were lost to us once you started taking illegal drugs. The tears stopped, and a determined expression appeared on her face. It wasn't anger, but rather a steely determination that literally turned her fragile face into something unshakable. She continued to explain that after I took almost all of our savings to buy alcohol and drugs, she and her father planned an escape. They met with a lawyer and filed a restraining order banning me from approaching them. That same day, they collected all my things and put them in the hallway. When I finally got home, I didn't know that her father was in the apartment with a baseball bat in case I got rowdy. But I didn't mean to get rowdy. To be honest, I could barely stand on my feet. I was so pumped. Her cold gaze cut through me like sharp shards of ice. Steve, I hated you. You destroyed our marriage and ruined my life. I went from being a happy wife to a single mother who could barely pay all the bills you left behind. Another month passed before I found out that you were using my credit cards to buy things and then pay them back in cash to buy harmful drugs. I knew you were having trouble adjusting, but you never talked to me about it. I tried, but you pushed me away every time. Eventually, I stopped trying. Then I made the mistake my grandmother warned me about. Sorry, I said with difficulty, suppressing the lump in my throat. Excuse me, she said with such contempt that I couldn't even look at her. Do you have any idea what a nightmare it was to live under police protection because some merchant came to us and demanded $1,000 that he said you owed him? He threatened to burn the apartment to the ground and hand me over to be torn to pieces by his brothers if I didn't pay. I sat with my head bowed, covering my face with my hands. What could I say? Nothing. I put my family at risk for drugs in order to forget and escape reality. Fortunately, the police from the drug squad scared him off. That same weekend, Abby and I moved in with my parents. It took almost a year for me to save enough money to afford this apartment. Now, if I don't have money for something, I don't buy it. And thanks to you, I'm almost out of debt and intend to stay out of it for the rest of my life. Becky looked straight at me, as if right through me. I felt small and insignificant. This was not the broken girl I left years ago. Sitting in front of me was a mature, strong woman who knew what she wanted, and God help anyone who stood in her way. Becky, I'm not here for forgiveness. I don't deserve him. I should never have married you. I was so confused that I couldn't help myself or you. You didn't love me. Her voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. Of course I loved you, but I tried to use you to feel normal, to solve my problems. And we all know how that turned out. John and I went to Vietnam thinking it was going to be one hell of an adventure. And yes, it was there, for about a week. We were taught that Marines are invulnerable, but that was not the case. I saw Viet Cong killed, but not Marines until that night. Steve, if you're having a hard time. She tried to interrupt, reaching towards me. No, I have to say this, otherwise I will never be able to move on. Maybe this will give you some insight into what I was going through back then. Steve, if you remember, I tried. I tried to tell you what was wrong, but you pushed me away every time. Her voice was harsh. She still did not give me the slightest concession. I know, but how can you explain something that you don't fully understand? I still have nightmares about that night. It was like being thrown into a meat grinder. We didn't stand a chance. When I ran up to John, he was already almost dead. I closed my eyes and everything came back to my mind, including the pain that I had tried to forget for so many years. My eyes filled with tears, my throat tightened, and my voice shook, but I needed to say it. I did everything I could, but my best friend still died in my arms. He only went to Vietnam because of me. In the end, I returned home, and John was in a coffin. For months, I relived the night he told me he would always have my back, but I couldn't cover it. I failed him. When I returned home and people asked if I had been to Vietnam, I lied and said no. I was ashamed. Not for being there, but for what I didn't do. The only way to cope was to numb the pain. At first I drank until I couldn't feel it anymore, but it didn't help. Then I moved on to something heavier. They were more expensive, but more effective. I stopped and took a deep breath to collect my thoughts. I saw Becky quietly wipe her tears with a handkerchief, but quickly hid it when I looked at her. I felt like I had to tell everything. It was like cleansing the soul. I tried to stop. I really tried. But I was weak. By the time you kicked me out, I was no longer the same person you knew your whole life. I was an empty shell looking for somewhere to fall and die. For a year and a half, I tried to commit suicide. Cheap booze, homemade drugs, and cheap hotels, that's what my life has become. I did a lot of things that I am ashamed of, and if I had been caught then, I would still be in prison. I don't remember how I ended up on my grandmother's porch that night. If she hadn't let me in, I would be dead now. Grandma is a strong woman. She helped me, but did not feel sorry for me. I lost it once, and she made it clear that it was the first and last time. This year has been hard, Becky, but I have gotten rid of most of my demons. I'm not completely healed yet, but I'll definitely get through it. We took a break for lunch. We had both poured our hearts out and needed a break to process everything that had been said. We ordered pizza, and although I was dying for beer, I knew it would be a big mistake. We sat in silence, but our eyes spoke to each other more than words. "Do you still love Abby and me?" she asked without looking me in the eye. I've been waiting for this question. I think yes. I know I love what we had. Steve, don't get me wrong, but I don't trust you yet. Don't worry, I don't fully trust myself either, but I'm getting better. All I'm asking for is the opportunity to be a part of your and Abby's life. If you say no, I can understand it, but I hope you still give me a chance. We talked for another hour and decided to call it a day. I wish I could have spent a few more hours with her, but we were both exhausted. A million thoughts raced through my head on the way back to my grandmother. The biggest one is, what now? Over the next couple of months, I began to cautiously hope that my relationship with Becky would improve. If I wasn't completely blind, then she began to warm up to me. Unless I was completely blind, it seemed that Becky was beginning to warm up to me. We talked not only about Abby, but about what was going on in our lives in general. When I told her that I was studying to become a therapist, she approved of my decision. This is what will probably suit you. After all, you know what it's like to be at the bottom and rise back up. I only regret that last time you tried to drag us along with you. I bit my tongue, trying not to get angry. Her words were cruel, but that's how Becky was now. She said what she thought, and was not shy about expressing it, at least not with me. Now, in addition to Friday family dinners, on Mondays, after school at 5 in the evening, I would buy something for dessert and stop by their place on the way home. It was a pleasant end to a long school day. Abby still greeted me at the door with a kiss and a hug, but this new excitement gradually faded. She just got used to me being a part of her life. What I was really interested in was whether Becky was still dating this Mr. Perfect guy, but I never asked. I was afraid to hear the answer. Instead of buying clothes and toys for Abby, I started giving Becky money every week to help with expenses. The first time I handed her the check, she made quite a scene. "We're doing just fine without your money," she said, irritably pushing the check back toward me across the kitchen table. "I know, but Abby is my daughter, and I want to help." After much persuasion, she finally took the money. "I figure I can use it for something I couldn't afford before." She didn't say it out loud, but there was gratitude in her eyes. Now, every Friday when I handed Becky the check, she smiled and silently put it in her pocket. I did everything right for her and for Abby, and it was a good feeling. For the next meeting, I want each of you to bring the person who matters most to you, Greg announced at the next support group meeting. It doesn't have to be one person. I want to meet those for whom you are trying so hard. I chose the easiest option and invited my grandmother. I thought about asking Becky, but I wasn't sure she would agree, and I didn't want to risk it when things were finally starting to get better between us. Grandmother refused. "Honey, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but I'm not the person you need to bring. I think there are two others who would be much better choices." "Grandma, I don't think Becky will agree to go," I said, as if complaining to my mother like a little child. "Well, you won't know until you ask, and I wouldn't wait until the last moment." Taking her advice, I called Becky on Thursday. "Steve, I'm not sure. Wouldn't you rather take your grandmother or your parents?" Her voice sounded uncertain. "Becky, I want you and Abby with me. You are the most important people in my life." She fell silent for a moment. "Give me a day or two to think." Throughout the week, we saw each other, but did not discuss the meeting. I didn't want her to feel like I was pushing her. I wanted her to go because she wanted to, and not out of a sense of duty. When Wednesday arrived and I still hadn't heard back from her, I was beginning to think the answer was no. I wanted her to at least tell me directly that she wouldn't go. Lost in my thoughts, I was startled when the phone next to the sofa rang. "What time will you pick us up?" I heard Becky's voice. I hesitated, trying to find the words. "When I didn't get a response, I thought you weren't going to go." I hoped it wasn't some kind of cruel joke. "Steve, I said I'd think about it, and I thought about it. So, what time are you coming, or do you want Abby and I to meet you on the spot?" "I'll be with you in 15 minutes. Actually, it took me 20, but who's counting? I was just praying that the Becky I could get along with would show up this evening." Greg did everything he could. The tables were packed with snacks, sliced cheese, and meat, vegetables, and fruits. Two huge coffee pots filled the air with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and a variety of diet carbonated drinks never left anyone without a drink. When Greg saw that I was coming with Becky and Abby, he immediately came up to us. "So this is the same woman who helped Steve stay on the right track. Nice to finally meet you, Becky. And this must be Abby." He got down on one knee and said, "Your daddy says you're the most beautiful girl in the world," and it looks like he wasn't exaggerating. Greg winked at Becky, and Abby had a huge smile on her face. "Go and help yourself before others take away all the goodies. Maybe we can talk a little later." Becky leaned over and whispered in my ear, "I think I like this guy already." The smile she gave me said that I was not mistaken in inviting them today. After dinner, I introduced Becky and Abby to everyone in my support group. Even Keith came with someone, although I didn't expect that from him. After an hour, Greg asked everyone to sit down. "I'll try to be brief," he began. Someone from the back row shouted, "Come on, we already heard that." Everyone laughed. Honestly, I want to say how proud I am of each of those sitting in this room. Most of you came here not knowing where you were going. Now you have a goal and direction. And a special thank you to the special people you brought with you today. Everyone started looking at each other. I noticed that some people exchanged smiles, and some even kissed their companions. I know that living with us was difficult and sometimes impossible, but I want to tell each of you, these men have done a lot of work to be who they are today. I won't stand here and say that they are healed and everything is fine. I'm not that naive, but I can tell that they are determined to regain the life they once lost. All I ask is that you find the strength to give them another chance. Now, let's get to dessert. Everyone applauded, and some had tears in their eyes. We stayed until 7, but had to take Abby home to put her to bed. Greg walked us to the door. Becky, if you ever want to talk, with or without Steve, my door is always open. Greg hugged her and told her not to disappear. I thought the drive back would be quiet, especially since Abby was struggling to sleep in the back seat. But that was not the case. Are all these guys Vietnam vets? All 11 people spent at least a year there. Some went there back in 1968, and the last one returned in 73. And they are all the same as you, with a damaged psyche. There was the usual caustic remark in her voice, but this time I noticed something new in it, more pain than sarcasm. I still wasn't used to it, and to be honest, I didn't like her harsh tone, but I restrained myself and didn't react aggressively. We should have talked about how she talks to me, but not now. Some are less, others are much more. But we all have a common problem, post-traumatic stress disorder. Will you be cured? I mean, are you ever going to be normal? I shrugged. Becky, what does normal even mean? All people have problems that affect their lives. What matters is how they deal with them. I couldn't cope, and it almost killed me. Now I'm learning to recognize what went wrong and trying to rewire my brain so it doesn't happen again. She was silent for a few minutes, then said quietly, I hope you understand that Abby and I support you. It gave me hope, but before I had time to rejoice at her words, she immediately pulled the rug out from under my feet. 3 weeks later, our conversation changed everything. Monday night, I just finished reading Abby a bedtime story and put her to bed. Her quiet, love you, daddy, melted my heart. I was over the moon when I walked into the kitchen where Becky was drinking coffee. I decided to share my happiness. She's so wonderful. You raised her really well. Becky smiled at my compliment. She can be naughty sometimes, but I wouldn't trade her for anything. How about I take you to Tony's on Saturday? Just the two of us. I'll make an agreement with Grandma. She'll look after Abby. You know how much she loves her. Her smile faded and she fell silent. I already have plans for Saturday. I wasn't going to give up. Can't you change them? I can't. The intense look that appeared on her face confirmed my worst suspicion. Sorry. My legs gave way and I collapsed onto the nearest chair. I don't know where I found the courage to ask the next question. Are you sleeping with him? I didn't want to hear the answer, but at that moment I needed to know the truth. It was time to rip off the bandage and reveal everything to the end. Her soft expression turned into a hard one, and the new, ruthless Becky replied, Sorry, it's none of your business. Are you sleeping with your blonde? What's her name? Those cutting notes that I began to hate again sounded in her voice. I stopped seeing Carol a couple of months ago. I didn't have the energy for 2 relationships, and she's not someone I want to spend my whole life with. How was I supposed to know that? Came her sarcastic answer. My world was falling apart, but I still had one last question I had to ask. Do you love him? Becky avoided my gaze. Steve, it's complicated. I was with him long before you came into our lives again. Honestly, I'm not sure, but I think so. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I won't give up on Abby even if you marry him. Who talked about marriage? Besides, Abby is your daughter. No one is going to take her away from you. It felt like the walls were closing in around me and I was short of air. I think it's time for me to leave. Steve, wait. We can go out to dinner next time or another time. I didn't answer. This won't happen. Not after what happened today. Becky continued to apologize and make excuses as I walked out the door of her apartment. I remained silent because I knew that if I said another word, it would be truly disgusting. I don't remember how I got home. I went in with optimism and left with an emptiness inside where there used to be room for Becky. I thought, even dreamed, that Abby, Becky, and I would be a family again. But I couldn't blame Becky. I had ruined everything myself and was now paying for my past mistakes. It's time to move on and get your thoughts and feelings in order, as we were told in the army. There were no more family dinners on Mondays and Fridays. I would pick Abby up from daycare after work at 3:30 and either take her to dinner or we would eat at Grandma's. I always tried to get her home before her normal bedtime. I said goodbye to her in the car before handing her over to Becky at the door. The future I so craved with Becky was gone. I ruined my life once, but I won't let that happen again. Now I was moving forward. I told you, one brick at a time. What was incomprehensible about this? Grandma asked a few weeks later when I returned from dropping Abby home. She's in love with her Mr. Perfect, and I'm tired of banging my head against the wall, hoping for a second chance. Becky and I had a good life, but I ruined everything. Now I make sure to spend as much time as possible with Abby. Case closed. You still love her, Grandmother said sharply. Grandma, I think I was in love with the idea that we would be a happy family again. But this will no longer happen. Now I need to look to the future and build a life for myself and Abby. I don't have the energy to chase after Becky anymore. Steve, you're making a big mistake. Grandma, I have made many mistakes in my life. Well, here's another one for you. I worked, focused on school, and spent all the time I could with Abby. I even restored my relationship with my parents. I apologized to them for what I did, and they forgave me. But I knew that we would never have the same closeness that we had before. I decided that working only with veterans would be too hard, too many painful memories. I realized that I wanted to work with people who were struggling with addiction. I went through it and knew how difficult it is to break the bonds of addiction. Greg understood me, but warned me that I would still likely see many veterans among my patients. There are never clear lines in life. I needed to move forward, or at least try. I still loved Becky and probably always will, but I should have moved on, not back. When was the last time you and Becky actually talked? Grandma asked one evening at dinner. A couple of months ago. And what? Abby recently asked me why you guys aren't family anymore. She said her mom is sad that you don't have dinner together anymore. And how did you answer her? What could I answer? I couldn't tell a 5-year-old girl that her mom and dad were a pair of stubborn donkeys who didn't understand that they were given the opportunity to be happy. I really wanted to restore our relationship, Grandma, but she's sleeping with Mr. Perfect, I exclaimed irritably. Watch your language and don't talk to me like that, young man. You're not old enough to get a beating from me. We looked at each other and laughed. Okay, maybe you've outgrown it, but in my house, talk decently. Grandma, I tried, but it looks like we won't get a second chance. It's a pity. I think you've both matured a lot and could make things right this time. My parents still went to church with Becky and Abby every Sunday. I was reproached more than once for not going to Mass with them, but I simply ignored these remarks. At 27 years old, I was too old for anyone to try to shame me. I coped as best I could, and suddenly what I feared most happened. In September, when it started to get cold outside, my grandmother fell ill. Stop babying me, she grumbled, wrapping herself in her warm terry robe. It's just a cold. But I didn't listen to her grumbling. I bought a humidifier and an electric heater to make her room warmer. The house was old, and there seemed to be a million holes in the ducts, leaving the second floor barely heated. It's not a cold, you have bronchitis. If we don't get this under control, you'll have to spend a week in the hospital. Is this what you want? She gave me an angry look. After my grandfather died, my grandmother got used to doing everything her own way, but not this time. Although she continued to assure me that everything was fine, I could see the worry in her eyes as she coughed and tried to catch her breath. When I looked at her on Wednesday morning, I found her sleeping in a chair. I wanted to wake her up and put her back in bed, but I changed my mind. Let him sleep, I thought, quietly leaving the room. I went to work on Thursday and Friday, but spent the weekend caring for my grandmother. She again complained about my excessive concern until I bought her broth and chicken from a Chinese restaurant nearby. It worked, but only for one evening. By morning, her usual stubborn character had returned. I'm not a cripple, I can take care of myself. But in reality, she couldn't anymore. Her condition was getting worse. On Tuesday morning, I found her again in the chair. She didn't wake up, no matter how much I tried to wake her up. I immediately called 911. It took almost 15 minutes for an ambulance to arrive. The doctors gave the grandmother oxygen and gave her an injection of adrenaline to bring her back to consciousness. Then they carefully placed her on a stretcher and lowered her down. I almost lost my composure when she looked at me with scared eyes. We were taken to a Minneapolis hospital. "Don't worry, Grandma, I'll be with you every step of the way." On the way to the hospital, I called my parents and told them what happened. "I'm riding with my grandmother in an ambulance. See you at the hospital." Soon my whole family gathered in the emergency room. We waited for 3 hours when the doctor finally came out. "How's my mom?" my mother asked, grabbing the doctor's hand, her eyes filled with tears. We gave her inhalation therapy to open her bronchi and make breathing easier. But she has fluid in her lungs. If her condition doesn't improve, we'll have to put her on oxygen. My father came up behind me, supporting my mother as her legs gave way. "We will know more after several tests. Your mother was not very happy when I said that she would have to stay here for a few days for observation." "Can I see her?" I asked. "Perhaps a little later, after the tests are over and she has rested a little. She's not happy to be here and has already told the nurses she wants steak for dinner, which I'm afraid won't happen. Come back around 7 in the evening. Everything should calm down by this time." It was like Grandma's. "If her condition changes, I will let you know immediately. Make sure the front desk has your contact details." I felt a little better. Here, in the hospital, she will receive all the necessary help. 2 days have passed. On Thursday, I went to work as usual, but the very next day, Friday, my mother called me. "Steve, come to the hospital, urgently." I arrived 20 minutes before my grandmother died. We watched in silence as her breathing became increasingly shallow and then stopped completely. I think part of me died in her room that day. I felt another emptiness appear in my heart. "Sorry." "We did everything we could," the doctor told my heartbroken mother. "She's in a better place," Mom said, holding on to Dad for support. "How can you say that?" I interrupted sharply, surprising them both with my tone. Grandmother loved life and had no intention of leaving it at all. Mom tried to take my hand. "Darling, I just meant that she's not suffering anymore." That's it. I left. My head was a mess of thoughts and memories, and I didn't want to see anyone. I returned to my grandmother's house, rushed around her small house, and eventually ended up in her bedroom. As always, there was perfect order. The only thing that stood out from the usual environment was the pillow and blanket that were still lying on the floor next to her chair. I'll miss her. I thought about going and getting drunk, but then I remembered her. That would be the last thing she wanted. She saved me when everyone else had given up on me. I lay down on her bed, closed my eyes, and poured out my soul to her until I fell asleep. This morning, I started a new chapter of my life without her. The funeral was much larger than I expected. In addition to our family, at least 30 of her friends came, some of whom I had not seen since childhood. In the church before the service, everyone exchanged memories and tears. At the cemetery, our relatives and friends paid their last respects. We watched as her coffin was lowered into the ground, just 100 feet from where John was buried. As the graveside service ended and people began to leave, Becky and Abby approached me. Becky touched my arm. "Please accept my condolences. I know how much your grandmother meant to you." "I'm sorry too, Daddy," Abby said, holding out her arms, wanting me to pick her up. I picked her up and held her tightly to me. My tears wet her cheek. It was comforting to feel something warm and alive. "Daddy, you're hurting me," Abby screamed. "Abby, Daddy will never hurt you." "He loves you more than anything in the world," I said, setting her down. "Your grandmother was an amazing woman," Becky said, moving closer and placing her hand on my back. "Abby and I will miss her." I looked at the grave. Why is it that everyone I love dies? If I didn't know better, I'd think I was some kind of damned person. I would never forgive myself if something happened to you too. Don't worry about us. We have a strong Marine keeping an eye on us, right, Abby? Abby nodded and took my hand, smiling at me. "Would you like to come to our place for dinner tomorrow? I'll cook a home-cooked meal, and then maybe we can talk. Will 6 suit you?" My thoughts went back to my grandmother. My throat tightened, and I could only nod. "Okay, see you then." After a kiss on the cheek, she and Abby headed to the parking lot. I watched them go, remembering another day, many years ago, when Becky said goodbye to me at the airport. This was the day John and I were leaving for Vietnam. I hope things work out better this time. The next day, my mother called and asked to come over. She had something important to say, and she wanted to do it in person. "I have dinner with Becky and Abby at 6. I'll come before that. Maybe at 5. It will do, dear." Our relationship had been strained lately, and from the serious tone of her voice, I knew that the conversation would not be an easy one. It won't be, "How are you doing?" I wonder what I did this time. I walked into my parents' kitchen a little before 5. They sat at a table with bottles of beer and a pile of papers in front of them. "Get a soda from the refrigerator if you want and sit down," the father said, pointing to the chair opposite them. I refused the drink and sat down. "I won't delay," he said, handing me a thick stack of papers. "Grandma left you her house. It has been paid and is already registered in your name." Stunned, I sat back in my chair. Grandma didn't tell me anything about this. When did she do this? About 3 months ago. She handled everything through a new lawyer and didn't tell anyone. We only found out yesterday when he brought her new will and these papers. Now the house is yours, along with everything in it. I couldn't believe what I heard. "Mom," she raised her hand, stopping me. "Darling, it was your grandmother's house, and she could do with it as she pleased. All I ask is that you leave a few mementos. I can pay for them if you want, but I'd like to keep them. This is all I have left of her." "Mom, take whatever you want," I said, taking the house key off the ring and handing it to her. "Sorry, I don't even know what to say. We don't need this house. He's too small. It will be suitable for you and the one with whom you decide to connect your life." I noticed my mother's look and understood what she was hinting at. "Mom, Dad, I have to go. Do you need to do something with the documents for your house?" "No, and if you need anything, I'll take care of it. Go and enjoy dinner with your family," Mom said, kissing and hugging me. "It's just a pity that we are no longer family." I walked out to the car and stopped with my hand on the door handle. Raising my eyes to the sky, I thanked my grandmother. This was the start of my evening. As always, Abby greeted me at the front door with a kiss and a hug. "Mom and I prepared dinner for you," she said proudly. I picked her up. "What have you prepared?" "Mom made spaghetti, and I spread butter on the bread." "And I love bread," I said, kissing her and tickling her. The last few days have been difficult, and Abby's loud laugh lifted my spirits a little. Becky stood in the kitchen doorway. Our eyes met. Her eyes were softer than the last time I dined with them. A good sign. Time will show. "Dinner is almost ready. Both of you go wash your hands, and I'll set the table." The food was delicious, but the company was even better. I remembered how Becky and I would sometimes eat modest dinners in the early years of our marriage. Then it wasn't about the food, it was about the fact that we were happy together. I wanted to go back to those times and fix what I had messed up, but since that was impossible, I could only move forward, trying to be better every day and show everyone that I had changed. After dessert and a short Disney movie, we put Abby to bed. "I love you, Daddy," she said, yawning and hugging her stuffed giraffe. I kissed the top of her head. "And I love you," I whispered, and we quietly left her room. "Coffee?" Becky suggested. "With pleasure." In the kitchen, Becky pressed the button on the coffee maker, and a minute later I heard the coffee begin to brew. We were silent. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. "I'm not dating him anymore," she blurted out. "For a long time, if you're interested." She nervously rubbed her hands, looking at me and, apparently, expecting some kind of reaction. I think the surprise on my face gave her the answer she wanted. I, as my grandmother advised, just listened. He proposed to me, and when I couldn't answer him, he understood everything. I was still silent, but I leaned forward and extended my hand. "I was afraid of you when you lost your temper," she continued. "It's not that I thought you could hurt Abby and me, but I didn't want to stay and watch you destroy yourself. So I left, not only physically, but also mentally. After that, when I didn't hear anything more from you, I thought that you had finally killed yourself. And then Abby and I began to move on with our lives." "You were right to leave," I admitted. "The truth is, I should have died. I think someone up there was keeping an eye on me after all." "Up there? It was your grandmother who saved you, not someone upstairs," Becky grinned. "When I first saw you after you moved in with her, I wanted to just slap you in the face and tell you how worthless you are. But your grandmother then said that you already hate yourself too much." She took my hand and pulled me towards the table where we sat down next to each other. "Did you know that she called me and told me how you were doing? She said you could handle it. She was sure of it." "Why did you then?" I began, but Becky interrupted me. "Why didn't I come back? You were still unpredictable, and I had Abby to think about. If you stuck it out, great, but if you didn't, I couldn't let us go through this again, so I waited. And besides, I had a lot of anger back then that needed to be dealt with." "So you found someone else?" I asked bitterly. "Yes and no," she sighed. "Deep down, I still cared about you, or at least the man you used to be. But I wasn't going to get into it again with my eyes closed. Not this time. I was no longer the naive 20-year-old girl you once married." Her face became serious. "Steve, I knew you had changed when you returned from Vietnam. I thought I could make you forget what happened there. And for a while, I thought I was making progress, especially after Abby was born. But how wrong I was." She stood up and began pacing back and forth in the kitchen, clearly searching for the right words. "Mom told me that when Dad returned from Korea, he also changed. He was no longer so cheerful and became much more serious. One night, Dad told Mom that he would never leave her again, that she was the most important thing in his life. This is what I expected from you." She fell silent and sat back down in her seat. "I have changed," I said quietly. "Don't I know that?" she answered. "If you hadn't changed, we wouldn't be talking now. When you first started showing up around me again, I didn't want anything to do with you. All I wanted was to hurt you as much as you hurt me. When I said all those terrible things to you, and you just stood there and accepted them without responding, I felt like I was hitting a little puppy. I didn't want you. I wanted the new life I had built for myself and Abby. I had a new man who loved me. But somehow you found your way back into my life." I looked at her in bewilderment. "Steve, I thought that after I told you about Jerry, you would just leave. But you didn't leave. Even though we were distant from each other, I saw how much you loved Abby, and honestly, I was jealous. I remembered our early years and missed the old Steve. When Abby asked why we weren't a family anymore, my heart almost broke. I probably should have seen a psychologist, but somehow I want you to be a part of Abby and I's life again. Just don't become what you were then. I can't stand this again. Becky, we've both changed. I'm not sure we'll like who we've become. Don't you want to try again?" I didn't say that. All I'm saying is that we need to take it step by step. And if we have problems, we will not hush them up. We will discuss them immediately." She was silent for a minute. "And no meetings with others? Will we be exclusive?" "Becky, you're the only one I want." "Fine, let it be so." We spent the next 2 hours discussing how we would move forward, what we could and couldn't do. She was still a little doubtful, and I wanted to prove to her that I was worth a second chance. I was far from perfect, but I was going to do my best. I could only hope that my efforts would be enough. We moved slowly for the first month, much slower than I would have liked. I understood Becky's concerns, but I was incredibly happy and wanted everything to go back to how it was at the beginning of our marriage. More than once I had to restrain my zeal so as not to drive myself into a corner. The main thing is that we are together again, I reassured myself at such moments. On Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays, I had dinner at their apartment. On Saturdays, if we could find a babysitter, Becky and I would go on a date. Otherwise, we would stay home and rent a movie. After 2 months, I started to get a little nervous. Everything was reminiscent of teenage relationships. There were kisses, but things didn't go further than that. One evening, I got tired of it and decided to speak up. I poured Becky a glass of wine and began nervously fiddling with my can of Dr. Pepper, trying to find the right words to start a conversation. I was thinking about maybe asking my mom to look after Abby next weekend. There is one very cozy place, an inn with a restaurant. Greg said lake-facing rooms have amazing sunset views. His wife said it was very romantic there. Becky twirled her glass of wine in her hands. And why do we need to go to this most likely expensive inn? We have a pretty good apartment, and the rent for this month has already been paid. She didn't make it easy for me. Well, we could spend time together, without pressure. Maybe it would help us. How to say, get closer again. I wasn't this nervous even in my first fight. Steve, we won't move to the next level until I feel more comfortable with you. For God's sake, Becky, we were married for 3 years. How long does it take for you to feel comfortable again? I can't say exactly when this will happen, but I will understand when the time comes. How long did it take for you to feel comfortable with Mr. Perfect? Becky's eyes narrowed. It's none of your business. I didn't give her the opportunity to avoid answering. Wasn't it you who insisted that if one of us had a problem, we should talk about it right away? My relationship with Jerry is taboo, just like your relationship with Carol. It's in the past, and I want it to stay there. Like I said, we'll move on when I'm ready. I knew Becky well enough to know that no amount of persuasion would change her mind. We've had an amazing sex life in the past, but that was a long time ago. Looks like I'll have to rebuild this bridge again. I just hoped it wouldn't take too long. I hated cold showers, so I started caring for her again. That's what you could probably call what I did over the next month courtship. I didn't do anything big, but I tried to make sure Becky always felt how important she was to me. When she was late at work, I cooked dinner, washed her clothes, and in the evenings, when we watched TV, I massaged her feet with cream until her toes began to ache. I made mistakes and more than once bit my tongue to keep from saying something that could set us back days or even weeks. The main thing was that we were moving forward, and I felt like my girls were coming back into my life. But there were also difficulties. Becky began to experience sudden mood swings. During the time I was gone, she became very independent and developed, perhaps the most stubborn and abrasive character I have ever seen, and I have found myself on the receiving end of these traits more than once. Yes, I had messed up big time myself in the past, but I was starting to get tired of constantly paying for my mistakes just to win her back. We had a serious conversation ahead of us, and soon, but it was not the time yet. We were still in the honeymoon stage of our renewed relationship, and I didn't want to make waves. There was only 1 semester left before graduation, and I was in 7th heaven. I managed to get an internship at a large hospital institution, which began immediately after graduation. Greg was right about only one thing: it won't make me rich. The salary was small until I received my master's degree and passed the state exams. Luckily, the house was paid off, and I had no debt. But a week before graduation, Becky surprised me with unexpected news, or rather, it stunned me. I think we need to get married again and have a second child. My biological clock is already ticking, and it won't get any easier as I get older. A few months ago, Becky finally relented. After a bottle of her favorite wine, we started making love again. However, as with everything else, it seemed that even this aspect of our relationship was under her control. Sex only came up when she was in the mood or when I deserved it for something. I'm tired of these games. I've lived by her rules for too long now. It's time to show your independence. What about if I don't want a second child? And why do we even need to get married again? Note that I stopped asking you about this 6 months ago when you kept refusing. I think we should just live together for a while. You don't want to make a mistake twice in case something goes wrong again. Becky's eyes widened and she muttered in confusion. But we always wanted to, and if we have another child, I think it would be better if we were married. Becky, I want to enjoy freedom for a while after studying. And since I'm starting a new job and will be on probation, I don't need any additional stress. I noticed her dissatisfied face, but this time she didn't throw me caustic remarks like before. But dear. Now I heard dear, and even it seems somewhere in the conversation there was a please. Look, I think you and Abby should move in with me. This way we can save on rent, gas, and food. And I assume you expect me to share a bedroom with you? Her tone became harsher. Certainly. There's only one real bedroom upstairs, but I knocked down 2 walls and made another small one. So Abby will have her own room next to ours. Don't you think that would be the wrong example for Abby? 2 unmarried people sharing a bedroom. What's the difference between me staying at your place for the weekend and her seeing me leaving your bedroom for breakfast? She didn't have an answer to that. Look, we don't have to make decisions right now. Just think about it and we'll talk about it later. We decided to end the conversation and went to bed in her room. The next morning, when Becky thought I was still asleep, I heard her talking on the phone in the kitchen. Okay, I know I went too far. I just expected him to do whatever I asked to make me and Abby happy. And now he doesn't even want to marry me. He just wants to live together. My parents won't like it, although they won't have a say in what we decide. I stopped 4 steps from the kitchen and continued listening. Jerry was a good guy, and he loved Abby, but I heard a pause, and apparently someone on the other end of the line said something to her. And then I heard something that would have been better not to hear. No, that's not the point. Jerry was good in bed, maybe even better than Steve. But I have a history with Steve, and although I don't fully trust him yet, I think he's the one I want to be with. I would give anything to know who she was talking to. Of course, I love him. That goes without saying. But over the past couple of years, I've gotten used to being in charge, and I don't want to lose control. I made a lot of noise on purpose as I walked down the hallway and heard Becky ending the call. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, entering the kitchen. "Just with a friend from work." "Were you talking about me?" "No, we didn't talk about you. And by the way, not only men can be narcissistic. Women also discuss other things than who they are dating. If you really want to know, we discussed her ex, or rather, almost an ex. They are now in the process of divorce. Sorry to hear this. I went through this, and as they say, I didn't get a t-shirt for it. I tried to bring a little humor into the conversation, but it didn't work. It's hard for her now. Her husband left, leaving her with a small child, and refuses to pay child support. She filed for divorce, but it still takes time. Time that she and her child do not have. Sounds like 2 more people I know. Luckily, we were able to resolve our issues and became a family again. Becky didn't answer, but I saw thoughts swirling in her eyes. The following weekend, Becky and Abby moved in with me. After 30 days of work, I received my first review of my internship. It turned out to be not as good as I wanted. The manager made it clear that, in his opinion, I was not giving 100%. "Steve, are you holding back on purpose for some reason?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I'm really trying my best not to make a mistake. That's it. You're still learning, and you'll inevitably make mistakes. That's why you're working under Robert. I just don't want to ruin someone's life," I admitted, remembering my experience with doctors at the VA. "Listen, you can only guide, advise, and advise, but it ultimately depends on the patient. If he wants to get better, he must take the steps himself." I see in your personal file that you went through the same thing as our patients. You know better than anyone how high the failure rate is for people with addictions. All we can do is do our best and save as many lives as we can. I worked at a private residential drug and alcohol treatment center. It was a closed facility, but patients were not forced to participate in therapy. Someone paid a lot of money for their stay. My 60 and 90-day reports were much better. I became more confident, and this was reflected in the way patients responded to my methods. They increased my salary and told me that if I continued my studies, I would be reimbursed for the cost of the courses. I took advantage of this opportunity and signed up for the next semester. I was enthusiastic, but decided not to take too many courses, preferring just one at a time. I was enjoying my life with Becky and Abby too much to ruin anything again. Then everything came to me unexpectedly and imperceptibly. I just made breakfast on Sunday morning because I couldn't sleep. I woke up early on Sunday morning and couldn't sleep, so I quietly got out of bed and went downstairs. I brought the newspaper, looked at the headlines, and suddenly realized how hungry I was. 45 minutes later, I had the table set. Bacon, juice, coffee, and hot chocolate for Abby, her favorite treat on a cold morning. I had just finished cooking and was about to wake up Becky and Abby when I suddenly realized what I was feeling. Normalcy. That word suddenly came to my mind. The last 9 months have been good. Not even just good, they were great. Becky and I were no longer the old couple who were once torn apart by tension and conflict. We both became adults, responsible people. I quietly returned to our bedroom and lay back under the covers. After Becky and Abby started going to church on Saturday nights, Becky liked to sleep in longer on Sunday if Abby didn't wake her up first. I hugged her tighter, my hands sliding over her body. "If you let me sleep for another half hour, I'll be your best friend," she muttered. I kissed her neck while continuing to explore her body with my hands. "You know that our daughter will wake up soon, and even if we close the door, she still won't leave us alone." She turned to face me. "Maybe we can take a nap after breakfast. We'll put on a movie for Abby and quietly go back to the bedroom," I suggested with a smile. As if it would work, she smiled. "You should have tried last night instead of falling asleep on me," she joked. "Okay, get up. Breakfast is already on the table. Otherwise, it will get cold. I'll go wake up Abby. See you downstairs." Almost our whole weekend went like this. On weekdays, we had a routine worked out to the smallest detail. Becky picked Abby up from after school, quickly prepared dinner, and while we ate, we talked about how the day went. After dinner, the two of us washed the dishes, dreaming of the day when we could afford a dishwasher. Then, while one of us helped Abby with her homework, the other did the rest. It seemed like there was always something that needed to be done. By 7:30, after an evening swim, Abby would race me around the room before bed. I usually had the honor of reading to her at night because she loved the way I read aloud and imitated the characters. It became something I looked forward to every night. After a few goodnight kisses, Abby fell asleep and Becky and I could spend time alone. I watched Becky get ready for bed from the comfort of our large waterbed. She washed her face, brushed her teeth, and laid out her clothes for the next day. She usually slept in a large t-shirt, which she took from my closet one day. Everything became so normal, and I liked it. "Why are you looking like that?" Becky asked, spreading her ponytail. "Nothing," I replied with a grin. She pulled the t-shirt a little lower. "Isn't this enough for you? You will always be the most beautiful woman to me." "How many other naked women have you seen lately?" She laughed. "Well, there was a girl in the video we watched last week." She looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "Do you really think her breasts are better than mine?" "No, they were too big and perfect. I like small and already familiar ones." "You're crazy, you know that?" she said, chuckling. "Would you like me to be different?" I saw her expression change for a moment. She seemed to remember something. "Are you happy?" she asked, clearly lost in thought. I quickly jumped out of bed and hugged her. "What do you think?" I asked, kissing her. "I think we're fine, it's just—" I didn't let her finish. He took her face in his hands and pulled her towards him. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but rather a calming and confident one. "Becky, I love you, and I'm happier than ever," I said quietly. And then I went for that kiss, which definitely deprived her of strength. That night we made love without using protection. Twice. And then they fell asleep in each other's arms. I was happy. The demons of the past were gone, and I finally found peace of mind. I moved on. I knew my grandmother would be proud of how far I had come. The next week, Becky didn't say anything about us making love without protection. Me too. One day she started to say something, but changed her mind. We both knew what we were doing, but neither of us wanted to bring it up. For now, I was confident that the conversation would take place this weekend, and I was ready for it. Besides, I had another conversation I was about to start. I didn't know what Becky did with our old wedding and engagement rings. So on Wednesday, I called my mom and said I wanted to come over after work to discuss something. I needed to be careful in this conversation, knowing what memories it might bring up. When I arrived, only my mother was at home. My father hasn't returned from work yet. "Mom, what did you do with Grandma's wedding rings?" I asked, trying to sound as gentle as possible. "I have them," she answered. "Why are you asking?" "I'm going to propose to Becky this weekend, and I'd like to give her my grandma's ring." A shadow of anger flashed across her face. "I would love to give you my wedding ring, but as you remember, someone stole it and pawned it to buy illegal substances." I was afraid this topic would come up. "Mom, I'm sorry. In those days, I would have sold my kidney to get money for a dose. But that was then, and now everything is different. I can't get the rings back, and just saying, 'I'm sorry' isn't enough. Becky and I are starting all over again, and I would love for her to wear her grandmother's ring. That would be like a blessing from her. If it's money, I can pay for it." Mom sighed, looking at me seriously. "Steve, it's not about the money. This is all I have left of my mother." I saw the pain in her eyes. "Mom, don't worry. Keep the rings. I'll buy new ones for Becky." I walked up, hugged her, and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Mom." After that, I quickly left. My past is left behind, but not forgotten. I had to resort to Plan B. The ring I found was modest, a little less than half a card. I bought it from one of my colleagues whose fiancée left him a year ago. He wanted to get rid of it, and I needed an engagement ring, so we both got ours. We agreed on a price, and I was ready for Saturday night. But another problem arose. Our nanny got sick and canceled plans for Saturday. Becky's parents and mine were also busy, and I had to go to Plan C, or even make one up on the fly. "What do you think about the idea of ordering Chinese takeaway?" I asked, trying to save the situation. "I think Abby would prefer pizza, but Chinese will do." I ordered pizza and picked up Chinese food. I didn't want to take any chances this evening. I planned to have a romantic dinner that would end with me getting down on one knee with a ring in my hand. I could have waited until next weekend, but the ring was burning my pocket, and I couldn't wait any longer. Dinner was on the table. Becky was setting out the drinks, and I took Abby by the hand and led her into the living room. "Darling, after dinner I want you to give this to Mom," I said, handing her the velvet box. Abby looked at the box and then at me. "Okay," she nodded with a calm expression on her face. Since my original plan fell through, I decided it would be nice if Abby gave the ring. Becky definitely doesn't expect the proposal to come from her daughter. Plan C was in action. Dinner was stressful for me. Abby was munching on her pizza, chatting about some cartoon she had recently watched, and I was just nervously silent, waiting for the right moment. I had just stuffed my mouth with Kung Pao chicken when Abby put down a slice of pizza and handed Mom the velvet box. "Here, Mom," she said, holding out her hand. "What is this?" Becky asked in surprise, looking first at Abby and then at me. "Dad asked me to give this to you," Abby said with a serious face and returned to her pizza. I shrugged and finally managed to swallow the bite, trying to look as calm as possible, although inside I was seething with nerves. Becky looked at the box, placed it next to the plate, and, to my horror, ignored it. How I survived the rest of the dinner, I don't know. Becky was surprisingly calm, at least outwardly. She cleared the table and loaded our new dishwasher, and I was exhausted, waiting for her to even look into the box. But instead, she just looked at me, took the box, and put it in her jeans pocket. Becky. I started, but she stopped me abruptly. Later, she answered briefly. One of the longest nights of my life began. Every time our eyes met, Becky would simply whisper, "Later." Later? How much later? I was going crazy with anticipation. When Abby finally went to bed, I deliberately chose the shortest book for her story. After kissing her goodnight, I went in search of Becky. I found her in our bedroom, completely naked, sitting on the bed, with a ring tied to a string around her neck. I leaned on the doorframe and tried to remain calm. "I see you opened the box," I said, trying to look calm. "Oh, this little thing," she answered, playing with the ring hanging on a thread. "I thought we should talk before deciding whether to wear it or not." I took off my t-shirt, kicked off my boots and pants, leaving myself in only boxers, and sat down next to her on the bed. "I think you have a couple of questions. Ask. Obviously, you changed your mind not about wanting a second child, but why did you suddenly decide to get married again?" she asked, looking into my eyes. "You were right about not wanting to change diapers at 40, I replied. "And as for marriage, I realized that it was just right. When we first got married, I was too young and didn't understand what it meant to be a husband. Now I understand, and I want to try my luck again." "One more try, huh?" She smiled sarcastically. "If you were a little more romantic, I might have already jumped on your neck." "You know I love you," I continued. "Damn, I've only been through all these trials for you. I want the life we could have had then. I want to fall asleep next to you and see you every morning when I open my eyes. I believe that we will all be happy together." After that, I fell silent, waiting for an answer, hoping for good news. "I want to get married in church this time." "No notaries," she said enthusiastically. "Agree. And I also want to wear a white wedding dress and have a real reception with music." "You want to have fun and dance until the morning." "And we'll arrange that," I nodded. "And most importantly, I want you to never stop loving me." "That's all," she added quietly, looking into my eyes. "You'll never have to worry about that," I said, taking the ring from her neck and placing it in her hand. "Are you ready to put it on and call our parents?" She smiled, put the ring on her finger, and looked at it for a while. "Let's call them tomorrow," she replied. "And now I want to spend the night with the man I fell in love with when I was 18 and with whom I want to spend the rest of my life." I got up and turned off the light. We've come full circle. After 5 mandatory pre-wedding consultations, we got married in St. Charles Church on April 2nd. This time we invited not only relatives, but also all our friends. Greg kindly agreed to be my best man. I insisted that John's parents be at the wedding table. Since my best friend couldn't be with us physically, I wanted his parents to bless our union. Shortly before the ceremony, an unexpected surprise awaited me. My mother came up to me and handed me a ring. "Here," she said, placing my grandmother's gold wedding ring into my hand. "My mother would like you to have it." I started to thank her, but she stopped me. "Your grandmother returned my son to me. I never got to thank her properly before she died." She put her hand on my cheek. "You and Becky have come a long way. The only advice I can give is, no matter what happens in the future, always love and trust each other. You deserve this second chance at happiness." The 3 of us stood at the altar in front of God and all our relatives. I held Abby in one hand and Becky in the other. We said vows that brought us together again. Abby was a big part of our reunion, so it was only right that she be there for the ceremony. At the end, she added a little fun to this solemn moment by loudly saying, "I agree too," smiling at both of us. We became a family again. At the reception, where about 55 people gathered, it was a real party. Becky got a little too drunk and, as she dreamed, danced until the last slow song. After spending the last year together, we didn't have to get reacquainted on our honeymoon this time. We spent 4 days in Las Vegas, went to shows, tried hotel buffets, and watched people lose their money. Like many others, we made our small contribution to the casino last night. A month after our wedding, I came home and found Becky delighted. Well, you wanted another child, and in 8 months your wish will come true. I hope this baby is as calm as Abby. Robert John was born 2 weeks premature. Unlike Abby, he didn't sleep through the night until his second month. During the first 2 months, we often wondered why we needed it, but in the end, we never regretted our decision. 6 months later, we sold our grandmother's small house and moved to a larger one. Life wasn't always easy. It got really hard at times, especially when I took on a second job, so we could afford to renovate our new old house. "Steve, I can hardly see you," Becky complained. "Abby keeps asking when her dad will start reading her bedtime stories again. Another 6 months, and I'll be able to update the wiring and put new floors in the kitchen and living room," I tried to justify myself. "In another 6 months, you might be living alone again if you keep this up." My second job lasted only 4 months. We decided that we could live with the old carpet in the living room for a while, but I couldn't live without my family. I focused on them again. I was still taking one class a semester. It took 2 more years before I received my master's degree and passed the state exams. A year later, I opened my own practice. I was now a state-certified psychotherapist. The first couple I helped with marital problems was a couple I was counseling in my new office. After they left, I noticed Becky looking at me with a sly grin. "What?" I asked, wondering why such a look. Becky came over and kissed me. "Who better to pull a marriage out of a hole than a person who has been through it himself?" she said, adding, "If we can handle it, anyone can." Our marriage was far from ideal. Over the next 10 years, we, like any couple, sometimes faced problems. Hell, some of our fights were reminiscent of ones we'd had in the past. But this time, when disagreements arose, we discussed them like the two adults we had become. Children grow up, and sometimes it is not clear how. When Abby ran away from home one night and took a car to meet her new boyfriend, she thought we'd never know. When she and her boyfriend were caught having sex in the back seat of the execution place, I decided that Becky would handle it better. I couldn't help but laugh, remembering how I was almost caught by my mother when a girl snuck into my room in the middle of the night. I thought Robert was the perfect kid until I got a $400 phone bill. It turned out that my son found himself a girlfriend on the other side of the world and talked to her on the phone every night at my expense. If these were the worst misdeeds of our children, I considered myself lucky. We had good children. They, of course, grew up and went off to college one by one. There were no options for us. This was a must. Thank God they both attended local universities and lived at home, otherwise we would still be paying for their education in our 70s. Abby became an emergency room nurse, and Robert became something of a computer geek. He tried to explain to me what he was doing, but maybe someday I would understand it. In fact, it didn't matter to me. The main thing is that he was happy. Like all kids, they eventually moved out, and Becky and I became empty nesters. Becky took it hard for a whole month. Then one morning I came down to breakfast and saw my wife completely naked, sitting at the kitchen table. "I like your new style, but I have to admit I'm a little surprised," I said with a smile. "It just suddenly dawned on me that now there's no one else to shame at home," she answered, smiling back. "You see, if we want to make love, I will no longer need to scream into my pillow to muffle my screams of joy. Now I can scream as much as I want, and one more thing, now we can do this anywhere in the house without fear that someone will come in and catch us." That morning, we dedicated the kitchen island to new memories. We started doing what we had always dreamed of. One summer, we rented an RV and went to the Grand Canyon. Boredom. We drove such a distance to look at a large, beautiful hole in the ground. When I convinced Becky to go on a cruise, we realized what we had been missing all this time. It was wonderful to just sit, relax, and let someone else cook and entertain us. We even found an adults-only area on the top deck for a purpose. I tried to persuade my wife to stay and relax with the crowd, but she reminded me, "If you want to see my breasts, we will have to go down to the cabin. because these body parts are not destined to appear in public. I took one last look at the crowd and led them to the cabin. Becky has always been the one for me. Over the next few years, there was always something that Becky wanted to see or do. I was more than happy to fulfill her wishes. We did not become avid travelers, but we managed to get quite a few stamps in our passports. When Abby and Robert found their soulmates, they both said they hoped their marriages would be half as happy as ours. Becky gave me a look that explained everything without words. We could still read each other's thoughts, and that was good. One evening, I was watching television when they showed footage of helicopters picking up people from the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. They saved the lucky few who managed to escape. I thought, what a terrible failure. So many thousands of lives, so many losses for what? So that politicians in Washington can play God. Later, I watched in horror as the United States intervened again and again in conflicts around the world. I felt compassion for our soldiers who were sent endlessly to serve, trying to suppress uprisings in other countries or solve their internal problems. It never seemed to work, but we kept trying. And then September 11th happened. Like the rest of the world, I was stunned. Shock soon turned to anger. When the president ordered our troops into action, I thought for a moment that I would go with them myself if I could. But then I remembered Vietnam. The war was for the young, not for the 50-year-old veteran with a bad leg. Wars never go according to plan. I watched the news, read the newspapers, and felt sorry for our guys who died in a foreign land, supposedly to protect us at home. That's what politicians and generals told us. One day in the grocery store, I heard a phrase that instantly took me back in time. "Thank you for your service," the young cashier said to the young Marine in uniform. Everything suddenly came flooding back. I couldn't think or breathe. Memories that I had suppressed for decades came flooding back like an avalanche. I don't remember how I got home. The first time I went through it alone, it almost destroyed me. This time Becky was next to me. I have become stronger. We have become stronger. Nobody truly forgets. We fool ourselves into thinking we can. It's how we deal with those terrible memories that makes us who we are. Becky and I were talking. We hugged. We made love like we hadn't for many years. The demons of the past were still with me, but they no longer controlled me. I won. When everything went wrong in the Middle East, I remembered Vietnam again. People continued to support our troops, but I saw the same distant look in the eyes of men and women returning home after multiple tours of duty as Vietnam veterans. They were forced to fight to the limit, and that's when I realized I had to do something. Something had to be done to help our soldiers, but I didn't know where to start. One night, while lying in bed, an idea came to me. I decided to call Greg. We hadn't talked for a long time. Like me, he was still in the business of helping other people. "Greg, this is Steve Moore," I said when he answered the phone. "Hey, buddy, I haven't heard from you for a long time," he answered with a warm voice. "Too long ago," I replied, knowing that the conversation would not be easy. "I feel like you understand that this is not just a friendly call. I have something to do with you." "What can I do for you?" Greg asked, immediately switching to a serious tone. "Do you still see anyone from the old support group?" "Yes, from time to time I meet some guys in the city." "Why do you need this?" "I want to gather our old team for one last mission." "Steve, I don't understand." "What mission? What are you talking about?" Then I told him my plan. 3 weeks later, 12 Vietnam veterans stood in the terminal at Minneapolis International Airport, along with 15 members of Veterans of Foreign Wars Post No. 22. I did my research and learned that today 4 planes were supposed to arrive with soldiers returning from the front. Friends who were still serving in the Army told me the flight numbers and airlines on which the soldiers were supposed to return. We split into small groups to cover all 3 terminals. 20 minutes later, we saw 8 men in uniform walking towards the baggage claim area. We walked up to them, handed them each a small American flag, and shook hands. "Thank you for your service," I said, and saluted everyone. The soldiers' faces showed surprise. Someone smiled, someone's eyes moistened, and some hugged us. That day, every man and woman in uniform we met was commended for their service. We met all the flights with returning soldiers. Our activities spread quickly. Other VFW posts and military organizations have joined the initiative. About 3 weeks after I started this campaign, Becky came to the airport with me. She stood to the side, holding a box of our American flags, and watched. When I approached her to get new flags, she unexpectedly kissed me. It reminded me of the famous photo from Times Square at the end of World War II. Only in reverse now it was her who was bursting into my world with that kiss. "Have I ever told you how much I love you?" she asked, smiling slightly. "Yes, but I never get tired of hearing it," I replied, receiving another kiss. "Stephen Moore, you can be insufferable sometimes, but you are a good person." "Don't ever forget that," she said, hugging me. I will never forget it. And my comrades and I never again allowed returning soldiers to feel undervalued, as we did after Vietnam. The demons from the past remain, but I have finally pacified them. I won. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.